So for those of you watching this on demand or just tuning in, an apocalyptic storm rolled in 10 minutes into my class, and we lost power and electricity. So we're picking it back up. And when we lost power, I was talking about the fact that because this is an election year, the freedom of press is more important than ever. And there's this thing that keeps kind of sticking to me, right? This is my rub that I had to sort of vet. And it's why ultimately this requires a conscious collective for us as an industry at this time. We have to form, the same sort of approach and perspective about our response to shared responsibilities across the value chain to enable media to be part of the change and to ultimately heal America, right? Ratings matter, that's a truth, and ratings drive revenue, that's another truth. So news more so on television slants ever increasingly more negative, right? And if you sort of look into this, it's consistent, it's measurable, it's quantifiable, it's objective, right? And that is because there is this human sort of condition called the negativity bias that provides scientific proof that negative headlines drive better ratings, which drives more revenue. Right? Which is why the news broadcasters and news programmers are not the bad guys. So I want to describe this to you, right? So the negativity bias is also known as the negativity effect. It is the notion that even when of equal intensity, things of a more negative nature, i.e. unpleasant thoughts, emotions, social interactions, harmful traumatic events, have a greater effect on one's psychological state and processes than neutral or positive things. In other words, something very positive will generally have less of an impact on a person's behavior or resonance and cognition than something equally emotional but negative. This goes back to biology. So if something was a danger to us or hurt us or was a threat, we are biologically predisposed to remember those things because that is our survival instinct. So this is just science, right? And further on, there was some interesting research, which is having studied the negativity bias and then sort of led me to this research that I found that was published in August of last year by students from Columbia, Carnegie Mellon, and the Indian Institute of Technology that studied sentiment polarity of headlines of news outlets on social media, right? And they scored them as either negative, positive, or neutral. So from a +5, -5, and then 0, obviously in the middle being neutral. And they looked at radio, print, and television broadcasters' social media habits and headlines, right? And they found that television news networks consistently publish negative headlines, while print and radio skew neutral to positive. And not surprisingly, the more negative the headline, the more likely it was to be shared. Again, why our news broadcasters and programmers are not the bad guys. Panic porn works, right? It gets attention, it evokes reaction, is memorable, and ultimately results in more revenue for TV programmers. And they're in a business, right? They provide us a service in exchange for value. So much of the TV news on both sides of the divide tends to amplify and provide airtime to the rampant political propaganda. And I don't care what side of the aisle you sit on, it's both sides, right? And this often lends support to diminishing the rights of our citizens in some way. So silence the press doesn't serve us, right? And silencing the press, we hear often within this propaganda, if it doesn't serve either party, either side, or one's agenda, right? So this idea that we should shut down Twitter if they screen our tweets, or we should go after social media in general, or use force to stop protests because it doesn't serve us and we don't want to hear the message. This is something the media has a choice about how they cover and how they deliver and what headlines they use to convey this information as journalists to America. But the good news is, which we saw with the previous research, is that although negative headlines evoke response, eventually audiences fatigue from hearing the sky is falling over and over again as an unchanged narrative. That's what we saw with COVID. So the time has come for us as an industry to take responsibility for the role we play in perpetuating fear, hate, and divide in our nation. We still have a free press. Let's not forget that. It feels like it's under attack and it's at risk, but we still have this. And this is a Cartesian moment for us to choose our own future and our destiny for media. We can choose to be part of the collapse of America and further division and proliferation of hate and racism and all the other nastiness that we are seeing coming out in some of our citizens, a very, very small number, or the beginning of healing of America. We're still a United States, right? Not sure we're so united. Media can play a role in returning that. There will be short-term consequences. I own that. I consider myself a conscious capitalist. And as a conscious capitalist, I recognize there are short-term economic costs, right? And consequences. But the long-term cost will be much greater if we do not leverage the power we have to help bridge the division in our country right fucking now. We must use the power and platforms we have, and our media dollars in particular, to work as a unified industry that chooses to embrace hope and love in lieu of hate. Brands and advertisers are going to be forced to not only reintroduce their brands in a new context to consumers, because the experience of interacting with those brands and discovering them has greatly changed, but they're also going to have to find their purpose and convey it in a way that is real and relatable to consumers. Colleen DeCourcy, who is a badass titan of the industry, and co-president and chief creative officer at Wieden & Kennedy, was asked by Fast Company a week or so ago when discussing the effect of COVID on brands, what she thinks. And she said, what I think the optimistic part of this is, the longer it goes on, the more people's minds are going to be wiped of brand preferences in many instances. That specific brand of toothpaste is going to matter to me less than just toothpaste. I think when people start to step outside again, brands will be reproving themselves, reintroducing themselves, restating why they should be a preference. We've talked about death of irony before, but I think this could be the death of bullshit. What did a campaign or ad do? What did it do for the brand? What did it do for the people? So eloquently has she put forth the reality facing brands and advertisers in the future and the buy side of our value chain, that you got to start over in some ways. The new normal is absolutely new, and you have to begin to ultimately start over from the beginning in creating new relationships and perceptions with your brand, and ultimately reintroducing your brand to consumers. And the media in which you do that is going to be critical in your success. In research done by Porter Novelli, Colleen's thesis was confirmed. So there's also empirical evidence to back this. This was all before the aftershock of COVID, right? So it came in the forward of before we had the protests and this unrest that we have now. And I suspect that actually would drive these statistics up, which are already pretty incredibly high. So 77% of Americans believe companies must prove they are making decisions in the national interest. And 75% said that the way companies act in the coming months will have direct impact on whether they support them in the future. Wow, that advertising and advertising creative and message is more important than ever, isn't it? The unprecedented chain of events over the last 90 days have resulted in Americans being tired of the constancy of doom and gloom from media, and they have reset their expectations for brands and their brand loyalties. Brands, America's woke. They are taking to the streets, speaking out, and finding their voice. It is not one of hate, but of love and of hope. And you must choose which of these options your brand will align, resonate, and embrace. You can draft off of fear for short-term gains and panic, or you can choose to be a lighthouse. And I'm going to tell you and give you a hint, love always wins. If this is a wake-up call to all of us, then we are never going to be woke as an industry. Your power is without bound, brands. Your power lies in every dollar you spend on the advertising, the message within your creative, and the content aside which you choose to be seen. It is brands that provide messages of empowerment, love, and equality that give voices to those that cannot speak because they cannot breathe, like Nike. It is these brands that will remain buoyant during these times. Nike's ad, "For once, don't do it," provided signal in the noise of hate and violence that has been the focal point of media coverage of late. Resonance and relevance and meeting. That is what they delivered. During Corona, we saw brands that got the message that celebrating what is wonderful about this country and finding and mining hope and using that and love to be their narrative that rose to the top, right? They were the signal in the noise. And it is what their consumers needed to hear more than their brand story. They recognized that. They looked at the lens of what their consumers needed without hubris. Apple, Uber, Budweiser. In the midst of this unrest right now, Peloton, Target, and others are declaring a stop to the hate, an end to racism, and it won't only matter that they change their message, but they also have to ensure that they give their media dollars to sellers that share their same values. If we choose to act as an industry with a collective consciousness, we can literally change the world. We can start by changing our fate as a country. And if the entirety of our industry declares that there is no place for hate and aligns their creative, investment, and programming, we can prove that when we do good, we will do well. American brands weave the fabric of American culture. This period of darkness has reset the relationships we have with brands and what they mean to us, and that creates an incredible opportunity. Again, this is all happening for us, not to us. And advertising can be the medium with which new relationships are defined and forged. It has historically been, and it will continue to be. By holding media sellers to a higher standard and our brands, the same standard to which American consumers are going to hold brands in the future, we can fuel as an industry and a value chain the fire of change. And let me say it again. This reset has created an opportunity for our industry to do good and do well, and to bring us deep self-awareness and a sense of gratitude and obligation to serve the freedom of press that we have in this country. This is how the seeds of long-term sustainable and renewable economic value and revenue are planted today. Allowing our programming, our headlines, and creative messaging to be solely reactive in times of crisis might present short-term upside, but it is not going to help your company weather the storms that still lie ahead. Do you want to thrive or do you want to survive? The rights and liberties afforded to us as Americans are what will power the light that displaces the darkness that surrounds us. We can together as a collective be the megaphone with which love speaks louder than hate, and as a result, connect with consumers and viewers in ways that transcend loyalty and embody trust and hope. We are the ones that can and will make America great again. Thank you for listening. Light to all, love to all, and peace to all.